All right. Those are all the announcements. Sign-up sheet should be going around. Let's just pray and we'll get into stuff. Father, thank you for this community. Thank you for all the things you have done over the last year, and we're looking forward to all the things you're going to do this year. I ask again that you would give us courage to step into what you are inviting us into today, and that we would be present in today and not be looking into the future, but we would be looking for what you're doing right now. And I ask that in your holy name. Amen. All right. So, we're starting a series called Life Together. Because to be at church at some level, to be in a community of worshipers of Jesus, you have life together, right? Life can't really be a church of one. So life together. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk over the next 6 weeks, I guess, including this week, 7 weeks, on what it looks like to have life together. And to begin that, I just want to start in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 19 through 22. It says, "Consequently, you are no longer foreigners and strangers, but fellow citizens with God's people, and also members of his household, built on the foundation of the apostles and the prophets, with Christ Jesus himself as the chief cornerstone. In him the whole building is joined together and rises to become a holy temple in the Lord. And in him you are being built together to become a dwelling in which God lives by his Spirit." Now this text, Ephesians chapter 2, Paul is talking about this idea of the Gentile, lots of us, and the Jew becoming one, and the mystery of that, becoming one church. And he kind of builds up this picture of what it looks like, that we are being built together on the prophets with Jesus as the cornerstone, and we're being shaped into a temple. And as a temple, we are the place where Jesus dwells. What's fascinating about that is it's not just the village. It's every time that you rub up against groups of people who follow Jesus, surrounding yourself around the ideas of Jesus, this is what's happening, right? This is what's happening. Now, what's fascinating about that is that there are some requirements for that to happen. A lot of times we think about Jesus as like he just does miraculous things and floats around, right? But even when we think about the Holy Spirit, he's moving like the wind. But the reality is that Jesus became a man and had to deal with his own brain and his own body. And he has to deal with us who have brains and bodies and emotions. And so when he's shaping and building us, one of the things that happens when you get together, and this is relatively obvious, when you get together and you're being shaped into the temple of God, is that you have to talk together, right? Talking is involved in being shaped. That's one. Number two is that when two people get together and do stuff, and in particular when they do stuff around Jesus, creativity happens. So you develop programs. You develop art. You develop new foods. You create things, right? So you talk to each other. You create things. And then there's another real simple thing that happens when people get together is that they move around each other, right? We move. None of you got here without moving, and I have to move you from over there drinking coffee to come sit down. I have to move the kids out of the back. Moving happens. Even when you're worshiping, right? If you feel free, then you move your arms. You shake things. You bow down. You move. So part of being shaped as a community is that you have to talk. You talk. You produce and create things. And you move. You move. And that, what happens is that creates a beautiful, vulnerable group of people if it's working the way God wants it to. Because if Jesus is the cornerstone, right? I know these are small, but these are just all the beautiful kids of our church. Not all of them, but as many as I could get in black and white and color. Anyway, I got to realize some are in black and white, some are in color. But everything's black. Anyway, I've been playing with my silly iPhone. But the thing that when I look at that is that there's a vulnerability to that. And when you and I are being shaped into the temple of God together, when we are talking, creating, and moving, what happens if it is done the way it's supposed to, if we're following Jesus, it creates a very good, beautiful vulnerability. And what's fascinating about that is that, I don't know if you know this, but 90% of the churches in the world are 70 people or less. And there are millions of them in the world. And as they gather together, and we can know this from the rest of Scripture, and particularly even in Ephesians, is that we are manifesting the glory of God as we are shaped into his temple, as we move, create, and speak to one another, right? That's a beautiful vulnerability if it's happening the way it's supposed to. But, as you well know, it doesn't work that way, right? So when you see the word shame is like the word pornography, right? You know it when you see it. Shame, you know it when you feel it, right? You know you're feeling shame when you feel it. Now, when you think about shame, some of you might be thinking, I don't really experience shame. Some of you probably think, because if you're like me, like shame at least has a moderate impact in my life and the way I understand who I am. For some of us, we're just racked with it and we can't get out from it, right? It's this experience, right? Because here we see these words I have up here are the last words of chapter 2 of Genesis. After God has created man and woman, and he's put them together, and they've quoted bad poetry, and they're there, it says, now the man and his wife were both naked. And that's key. Two people naked, the most vulnerable experience you can possibly have, staring at a naked person and them staring back at you. But this is key because it says, but they felt no shame. Now, commentators say that the Hebrew people they have lots of words, even though they don't have as many as the Greek. They have lots of words. They could have said they felt joy. They felt happy. They could have said they felt a lot of things. But they said they felt no shame. And part of that, Moses is most likely the one writing, it's a foreshadowing to what is going to rip us apart as a people, is shame. So let's just talk about how shame works so that we can kind of understand it. Now, shame can happen, like, for instance, when I was playing basketball and my coach would always tell me in high school, tie your shoes. And I didn't get to play very much. And I still just I refused to tie my shoes tightly. And one time I got to play in the game and I'm running on a fast break. And it looks like I trip over the line. So there's like 100 people watching me fall flat on my face because I didn't tie my shoes and I tripped over my shoelaces. That experience that I had there of exposure, something's wrong with me, like that, because that's what shame is. Shame is an exposure where I begin to think something is wrong, right? That is an example of shame. Here's the interesting thing about shame. It doesn't matter if it's your fault or not, right? You lied and got caught and you're ashamed. It has the same effect on you as you just did something silly or someone embarrassed you and made fun of you. Like, when I was in high school, my people used to say, oh, Eric, your nose is like really big. Like you look like you're Jewish. I don't know why high schoolers have lame insults. But I'm sure they're better now. But, so then when my son says, hey, Dad, you have a dad nose. Like there's a moment of shame, right? I experienced something. You all know what I'm talking about. So let me help you understand this from just a physiological perspective, because I want you to understand this felt thing because it's important. So when you come out of the womb as a child, you're looking for some things. You're looking to be known and to know stuff. And immediately you're trying to connect to a safe place. So if it works out correctly, you connect to mom and dad and they are safe and they provide for you and they feed you. And then you begin to explore things. So you find your feet, you poke yourself in the eye, they have to cover your fingers and you scratch yourself. All this is part of exploring. Once you get control of all of your body, you begin to go out and look at things, right? And then you come back to the safe place and you go and explore. There's a point in your life where you're safe and you go out and explore and you're starting to head to something that's dangerous. And your parents or the person who's the adult says no. They elevate their voice and they offer you a warning. What happens to your nervous system is really fascinating because at that moment, you freeze. You have some innate biological sense that there's a danger here, and the people who are really nice to you are now not safe because they've elevated and created a danger by the way they use their voice. So what happens in that moment right there, physiologically, you're not cognitive of this. You feel alone and abandoned because you've been cut off in a sense from your parents, and you can't go this way. So you feel caught there. That is the feeling that happens to you when you experience shame. Only in our culture, like everybody is an amateur psychologist, right? All of you are amateur psychologists. If you grew up in 2000s, you're an amateur psychologist. You think you know something about yourself and how people think and how it works. So everybody knows about fight and flight and freeze, right? It's the lizard brain that acts when danger comes, right? You fight, you got to protect yourself, or you run away, or you freeze, like a deer caught in the headlights, right? Well, when you experience shame, and a shameful thing, that's the experience that you have. Think about it. Every time that you've experienced something shameful, you might not be able to talk correctly, or you feel frozen, right? You can't move your arms. And for sure, when you're experiencing shame and you have those heightened experiences, you're not going to be creative. Right? Creativity is not going to happen. Movement doesn't happen unless it's to fight back. So here's my argument when I say shame. I would argue to you that this is the weapon of the enemy, Satan, and this is what he uses to destroy the beautiful construction that God has made of this world and now the church. That the thing that's going to divide us, the thing that's going to make life difficult for us, is our shame. And here's why. Because shame creates a story that we narrate. Right? We're always narrating stories. Right now, some of you are thinking, I forgot to turn off the light in the bathroom. That's a story. How you forgot to turn off the light in the bathroom. Some of you are like, I'm not quite sure what he's talking about. Maybe it's about me. Like, that's a story. We're all living by stories. Right? So if you think about the story of the big nose, like that, when I got made fun of that, the story I started telling is that I'm not actually worth looking at, right? There's something wrong with me. So every time someone points something out that's wrong with me, I have that experience, and I'm thinking there's something wrong with me. So the story I've already begun to tell is that there's something wrong with me. I will say that every single one of you have walked through these doors at some point or always with a shame story you're telling yourself. It could be that you feel like there are people here who know stuff about you that you don't know that they know and you haven't talked to them. Or you just come in because you already have a pretty strong shame narrative that you don't fit anywhere, so you just are already telling that story. I don't fit here. There's no way I could be accepted. Right? We could go on and on, but let me just show you how it works in the present day. This is my brother, Wes. He's my little brother. He's 40 years old, so that'll tell you that I'm at least in my 40s. So he got to come with his whole family for Christmas. So the last, 2 weeks or so, week and a half, all we have done is hung out with my brother and his family, which has been awesome. Because it's been 5 years since I think 5 years since we've seen them, 7 years since they've been here as a family. And there were less of them. Now, Wes is a really cool guy. Like, he is a musician who can pick up instruments and play them better than people who've practiced for a really long time. Like, he's been that way. He's irritating, but he's cool that way. He writes hundreds and hundreds of songs. I love my little brother. We don't always get along, but I love him. He loves me, mostly when he's not in the same state. But he talks and talks and talks to all his friends about the village. Oh, you should call Eric if you want to start a church. Oh, Eric is awesome. Eric this, Eric that. When we went back 5 years ago, I ended up on a panel at his church to talk about the church. Like he just really likes what I do and thinks I'm really cool, and I'm his older brother, and that's the way it should be, right? I mean, it's hopeful anyway. So he's going to come with his whole family to church. And so he does Sunday night. Last Sunday night, he came to church. And I'm already thinking, he doesn't really know that I'm not that cool. And now he's going to find out because he hasn't been to church in like 7 years, right? And so the whole time I'm sitting there, I have that narrative. So he comes in. The whole time I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, well, I think Mark could make some better points than he is making in his sermon right now. Why is my wife messing up? How come people keep getting up and walking around? Like I'm starting to have this like anxiety, and it's not about anybody but me, right? And I'm sitting back there next to him, and the thing that's happening there is, one, I started thinking, well, maybe somebody needs help out in the kitchen. I should get up and go help them. Maybe I should go check on the kids. I never do that, but I'm going to go back there and check on the kids. Then I started having arguments with him about the village in my head. Like, this is why it's this way. And, oh, yeah, no, there's not a lot of people here because of this. And blah. I'm going. And then at times I'm just like, I'm in this seat here. Well, here's what happens with Shane then. There I sat. I didn't get to connect to him and worship. Like, he's not going to be back for another 7 years. I didn't get to experience that because shame isolated me from him, because I had this narrative that I need to be okay. I need to live up, and I'm not. And he's going to see that. I didn't connect to all of you. I didn't listen very well to Mark's sermon, right? Like I had a lot going on there. Well, as I was thinking about it, like I could feel like my heightened sense. Like I wasn't really thinking straight. It was becoming about me. Right? It becomes very narrow, the story I'm telling. What I'm trying to say to you guys is it happens all the time. Little tiny things can trigger it, and the enemy, this is what he uses. And it is built around doubt, and what it wants to do, what the enemy wants to do with shame, is take you, if you could imagine yourself as a fist, everything in you feels good, shame will make you go like this. Like it just, everything goes internally goes crazy, and you're unable to connect to people. You can't create, and you feel frozen. You can't worship, right? This is what the enemy uses. He uses shame to do this, and we all have it. What I want to read to you, though, is 1 Corinthians chapter 8, first 3 verses. I have the third one up here, but I want to kind of show you how we tend to deal with shame, especially in the United States. So 1 Corinthians, I'm just going to walk through it just a little bit. It says, now, about food sacrificed to idols, we know that we all possess knowledge, but knowledge puffs up while love builds up. Now, the dialogue that Paul is about to address here is that in the church, some people are like, hey, we know there's only one true God. These idols aren't a god. So if you sacrifice food to them, it's just a piece of wood. It's not that big of a deal. Other people are saying, no, wait a minute. We've been worshiping these gods for a long time. We know they're more than wood. Yes, there's only one true God, but there's something else more than just a piece of wood. And so they're having a dialogue of knowledge. And here's how you deal with shame and how you try to prevent shame is by acquiring knowledge. Because if you can't be caught off guard, if you always know, then you aren't going to be ashamed. Right? Because you protect yourself. Think about when you look at Facebook, all Facebook is a dialogue of people protecting themselves from being ashamed and trying to present something that's not real. Right? They're trying to protect their shame. So even think about when you have an argument about politics, about philosophy, about religion, whatever you're having a conversation about, it's just an exchange of knowledge in which nobody feels built up or confident. Nobody feels like they can worship, that they have joy. No. And we do this all the time. The reason, like when we're feeling anxiety about something, it comes from shame, and it comes from the fact that there's some kind of unknown. We don't know. We aren't in control. Right? And so what it says here is knowledge kind of puffs us up, but what happens is that love builds us up. Or, the NASB says that it love, like it edifies, it builds an edifice, it builds a structure in somebody. Well, here's how I would translate it. Instead of love, I would use the words, I need you. I need you builds you up. That when you and I walk in the door, and if it's not, I know, but it's, I need you, regardless of what you think about me, regardless of your foibles, regardless of who you are, I need you. When I am vulnerable and I can say to Ryan, I need you, and look at me in the eye and honestly say that, then it's not me who's being built up, it's actually him. Because I'm fighting the shame that exists in him. I'm saying, no, you don't, it's not about, your hair, your dress, what your work. And I'm saying, Ryan, I need you. I need you to be creative. I need you to be able to understand who I am. I need you to be able to help me worship. That combats shame. That fights the enemy, and that actually builds up. And then it goes on, verse 2, it says, those who think they know something do not yet know as they ought to know. And here's what you ought to know. But whoever loves God is known by God. Here's the interesting thing. If you go back to, if you just change love to I need you, right? I need God, and those of us who are willing to face God and say, I need you, are known by God. What is the thing that we long for when we pop out of mom? To be known and to know, right? So if I'm able to anchor myself in being known by God, then I can go to Ryan and say, I need you. I can go out and explore. I can connect there. So this is important because if we're going to deal with our shame, and if we're going to be a community that's built together and has a vibrant creativity and a vulnerability about it, and a willingness to risk the way we worship and how we engage each other, then we have to start here. But the thing about shame is that it's pervasive in our culture and it's pervasive in your life. And you can't just wave a magic wand and eradicate it. And it is a felt thing. It's not like a cognitive thing. Yes, there's cognition built into it. There's thinking built into it. But it is something you feel, right? So the important part that we have to think about is we have to think about what is the story that we're actually telling. Because shame tells a story about who we are. But God tells a story about who we are. And the invitation to be shaped into a stone on the cornerstone, Jesus, is to begin to embrace the story that he invites us to tell and to throw away the stories of shame. Okay. Now, Hebrews chapter 12 says, therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses. Now, that therefore is based on chapter 11, which is all about these great men and women of faith who are our cloud of witnesses. But they aren't the only cloud of witnesses. You guys are actually a cloud of witnesses. The only way for you and me to deal with the messages of shame and to really disrupt the stories we tell in them, we have to see one another as the cloud of witnesses, the people who can help us walk out. That's when I come in here and say, I need you. What I'm saying to Ryan is not, I need you to help me fix my toilet, which he's kind of good at, right? And I'm not. What I'm saying is, I need you to help me walk out of my shame. I need you. You are the witness, because it continues to say, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. At the Village, we have a lot of really good runners. They like running and they're really good at it. none of them, I'm pretty sure, go to these marathons and strap on boulders and carry rocks like this while they're running. That's stupid. Now, I have seen some of them with backpacks while they're training, right? Because they want to feel heavier, and I don't know all the science behind that, but they do it. So, but when they go to run the race, they don't wear the backpack, right? The thing that I need from you and you need from me is that we need one another to help us untangle the things that are around us, and we need each other to deliver us, to take off the sin so that we can run. Now, this passage seems very individual and like you running the race, but in some ways this is all of us. I'm not trying to get to the finish line, some spiritual finish line before you. We are all trying to finish well together, and to do that we have to carry each other, we have to untangle each other, and we have to point things out to one another. So how does that work though? What is it? What do you actually need me to do for you? You don't need me to point out necessarily all the ways that you are failing. You don't need me to go and really tell you about how that actually isn't a shameful event and I should learn from it. I don't need that. Maybe on occasion. What I need help doing is verse 2. It says, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. The thing that I say, and we all need to say when we walk through these doors, and this is actually not just at the village. This is at your pilgrim groups, your monastic communities. This is when you go to work. That there's an element of this wherever there are followers of Jesus that you're saying, I need you to help me fix my eyes on Jesus. This little picture here is what parents do with children all the time when they want them to listen and they're little. You cup the child's head in your hand and you say, this is what you're going. It's good for teenagers too, actually. This is what you need to know, right? But for us, it's like, no, stop looking around here and fix your eyes on Jesus. And here's why you fix your eyes on Jesus. There's a lot of reasons, but at the moment that Jesus was going to die, when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, what did he say to his disciples? I need you. I need you to pray with me. I need you. I'm not going to sleep. I'm going to go die. I'm going to go face the most shameful event in my life ever. And I'm going to scorn that shame because I want to remove yours. I want to give you the opportunity to live a life of freedom. But Jesus, even in that most stressful moment, asked his disciples for help to pray. Even Jesus says, I need you. So here's my invitation to you for this year. As we go through this series, because the next 3 weeks we're going to talk about what leaders are supposed to do in a community of God, what the community is supposed to do, like the things that we're invited into. But as we talk about that, what I'd like you to invite you into is, number one, to think as you walk through these doors, as you go to different groups, even as you go to different domains of your life, like work, and come in saying, I need you. Come to the village saying, I need you. I need these people. Right? Come in a vulnerable stance. Try that. At least saying that to yourself. Number two, I want you to know something about the triune God, about the Spirit of God, is that God does not expect you to get it right. In fact, he's not surprised that you don't. And he's super patient. And the odd thing is, like, tonight when you go to bed, the God of the universe will have been like, he's sitting next to you. He's with you wherever you go. He's happy to be along this process. He's excited when you take a step forward. Right? He's not expecting you to get it right. So you need to hear that. So the second thing I would invite you to do, and this is going to be a little bit more practical and hopefully helpful, is I have a 3x5 card, and I'm going to ask you to do something that might produce some shame, and we can work through it. I'm going to hand these out. Any extras I'll need for the evening service. But you can write more than one. Now I've got pens. People need pens. All right, I'm going to just hand these to you. There's pens and cards. All right. I want you to write one predominant message of shame that you have in your life. One that maybe you walk into this room with, or have because you're in this room or at the village. All right? So maybe it's like, I don't really fit here. Could be that. Are there any number of things? It could be, I feel like I don't want anyone to look at me because... The story that you tend to tell yourself that is not the story of Jesus. So you're gonna write one of the messages of shame that you walk into the village with, one of the stronger stories you tell about yourself. Down. You can write multiple ones, but I would write one right now. And I'm going to invite you to do two things with this. One, I would invite you all week to just write down the different shame messages you hear. Because you hear them all day. Because here's the thing. Our communication is 60% nonverbal. So when I look at you a certain way, like frown at you, you have certain dialogue that happens, right? We're always reading messages. The enemy is always at work in this. And the thing that happens is that we get caught in that message and not in the one that's God's. Now, the second thing I want you to do, and you don't have to do this, but I'm going to invite you to do it. After service, I'm going to invite you to take that message that you just wrote and hand it to somebody in the village. I would suggest you hand it to somebody you don't actually know as well, so that, one or two people don't get a pile full of shame messages. But also because it's risky. And because by handing it to someone that you know but don't know well, you're saying, I need you. And the shame message that you receive from that person, I want you to read it, and then I want you to just pray for that person. Just a few words. Okay? I don't want you to fix it. I don't want you to say, no, that's not true about you. I just want you to pray for them. Because I want to start the year off saying that as a community, we're going to say no to the enemy and the messages of shame that he has been telling us. The more you're aware of that, and here's the fascinating thing, the more you're aware of it, you'll be aware of the way your body functions. And you're going to be aware of how you react to people, right? So somebody says, how come you didn't get the dishes done? If you're immediately going to have some kind of physiological kind of response to that, and you're going to be like, well, or just be quiet, or disappear, just, Instead, if you're aware of it, you can be like, oh, this is where the enemy could attack me. I didn't have time to do the dishes. Whatever, right? You're going to be aware of how you respond. And you can tell a different story about Jesus and his love for you, and that you don't really need a narrative from the enemy. You don't need the doubt and the abandonment that causes. So, I actually still have some time, so if anybody has questions or wants me to come at this from any other direction, I'd be happy to answer questions. Yes, in the back.
Thank you. I think this is a really fundamental topic. In my own experience, growing up, from the time I was small, in religion, Christian religion, why is shame so prevalently used as a tool to motivate people? I've been in a wide variety of groups, and almost every group I've been in, to some degree or another, shame is used as a motivating tool to get people to do whatever. Well, why do we so miss the heart of God that way?
Well, I mean, obviously, I think there are two things. One, oddly enough, it seems that in the DNA, God has put a certain level of shame to help us become obedient, right? So, like, I hit my brother when I'm little, and I have this, and I get caught, and there's this experience of all of my, my nervous system and sweating, and I'm caught. That caught feeling helps me reform my behavior. So there's this little element of that. But shame is so effective, right? It's the serpent begins to cast doubt on God, and once he casts doubt, he's leading then to shame. Like, he's able to just easily create disaster and get people to do stuff. Shame is effective. It's much more effective in the short term. So, I can say things like, well, how come, or you guys need to do this, or you need to do that, or we're not walking with God unless we're doing da-da-da-da, and then it's effective. I think that's really the only answer to that. Yeah, you could say that. Yeah. No, go for
it. I was reading a book recently about self-esteem, and it talked about, the inner critic that we all have,
yes,
we'll sometimes call it the enemy, depending on, the context. But the writer of it said that the reason we use that inner critic on ourselves a lot of the time is that, even though, 90% of the time all it does is make us feel worse, the 10% of the time that it is successful in getting whatever result we want reinforces the idea that it's effective. And so even though overall it makes for a worse life experience, we still think, oh, well, maybe if I beat myself up about this, I'll get that positive effect that I had that one or two times. So
that's interesting. We'll go Ryan, since we're close, and then hit Matt over there.
I'm just following up with that. I think that sometimes as a parent, we use shame as a motivator for our kids. And in my experience, the easiest time to do that is when you feel like you're desperate and you don't have any options.
Right.
And it's like the weapon of last resort. And it's really hard to just be vulnerable enough to allow whatever that you're trying to address to occur or fail.
Right. That's good. Hit Matt because he keeps getting that side.
So this is sort of the flip side of that topic of using shame to try to motivate people. I feel like, there are real tangible ways in which I can improve. And
yes.
When I focus on those things and think, okay, here's a way that I can improve, that provokes a lot of shame. Like, the example that comes to mind is you talked about running the race, and I'm really terrible at running, and both metaphorically and literally. And so how do I focus on how I can improve, and how do I look at Christ without just looking at how terrible I am in reverse? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think what you're saying is just that when you think, oh, I need to improve, or here's some areas I can improve, and then you feel shame because you don't have the capacity in some sense. Like, you're talking about running. Like, I need to run more. I'm not good at running. right?
I don't know if that's a great example, but yeah,
But it's an experience you have,
right.
right? So I would say there are two things. One, just as because shame is a felt thing, ultimately it's yours to process. Like I can't process it for you. So part of it is actually realizing what you're experiencing in that. Like, do you feel frozen? Do you feel like angry? Do you feel like you just want to avoid it altogether? Like, so just kind of understanding how you experience things. I think the second thing, and I think it's key, is that you can't fight shame. And in fact, you can't actually run the race by yourself. Like coming to people and saying, I don't run very well and I want to run better. I need you. Like, I can't do this on my own. I think that's part of being shaped into the temple of God, is being willing to bring forward the things that are vulnerable to you. I think partly why we do the internal thing is it's safe. Like, I'll figure out how to run better. I'll do all the things I need to do to run better. Instead of just going to somebody like Colleen and being like, I can't actually run. I don't know how to run. I'm going to be super vulnerable because like, could you show me how to run? Like, that's the whole different experience than you trying to figure it out on your own. So that would be my thought on that. Does anybody else have any other questions before we? Yes. Sorry, Corey.
So I've heard you use the term good shame,
Yes.
just like in our own conversation, and that I don't understand that. It sounds like such an oxymoron. To
Yeah.
me.
And I would say
define
that and he's not here, so I'm going to throw him under the bus a little bit. But Rod tends to use that term more than I do. I know what he means by it. I have become more uncomfortable with it too. I don't actually think there's ever good shame, because I don't think there's good shame in the garden, right? But I think there is a shame that leads to righteousness, that, like, in children, so I think a lot of times that people talk about good shame in that sense. Your child is caught, they feel ashamed, and then they no longer do what they're.
So it's a positive expression after exposure.
Yes.
Where we are able to talk and create and move about.
Yes. But what I would argue is that shame itself is a product of the fall. So I wouldn't hit my brother and then get in trouble if I wasn't already sinful. Does that make sense? So shame is never something that is good. And that's probably why you would feel uncomfortable with it.
Well, in response to what Ryan had said about, like disciplining our children and a last resort being shaming, to shame them, I have this experience where kind of like en route to disciplining my child, like my daughter will like flail her body and hurt herself, and I use that kind of natural consequence as the discipline, rather than being like, okay, well, I know you just hit your face on the wall, but we still need to put you in timeout. I'm like, okay, well, that was a natural consequence. And that exposure of that experience, I think she can experience that as shameful, but I want to be there to say, like, I know that you are exposed in this, and let's talk about love and how that consequence is a result of your disobedience.
Right. So
like, that's how I experience good shame, where I'm like, oh, I don't want my kid to get hurt, but the discipline and it has to be a result of the disobedience.
And I think, I guess, if you could talk about good shame in the sense of any time it happens in the cloud of witnesses and the cloud of witnesses says, you're okay, let's sit with this together, instead of you're not part of us. I think that's probably the best way to say it. I should. Oh, we got more people. Yeah. People throw in, we'll just run a little late.
The verse that brings to mind is 2 Corinthians 7:10. Godly sorrow brings repentance that leads to salvation and leaves no regret, but worldly sorrow brings death.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a distinction between godly sorrow and shame.
And that's a good picture.
2 Corinthians 7:10.
7:10. All right. I'm going to pray. Father in heaven, boom. thank you so much for your goodness. And I just ask that as we are formed into a community and into your temple, and as we go out and proclaim your glory to this world, that you would help us to stand vulnerably with our eyes fixed on you. And I ask that in your holy name. Amen.